With the arrival of a new generation of console hardware, there's the common transitional period between the new and the old. For some shifts, it's a no-brainer to keep the old hardware, either because of compatibility issues or, say, a classic nostalgia factor. Perhaps you're just attached to something so much that it's hard to let go. For some Switches, however, the transition is so unremarkable that it reads more like a hardware update for the old system. As such, when we bought ourselves a PlayStation 5, it felt redundant to keep the PlayStation 4, considering the new console played all the games we had for the old one. All games, except for one. PT was a brilliant horror game that both scared and inspired players around the time of its release. Although it is not actually a full game at all, as the name implies, it is a playable teaser of something promised to come in the future. It is simply a great testament to the quality and creativity that what essentially was a demo could even be considered one of the best games of the entire generation. And what makes it even more special is of course the fact that it is not available for download anymore. Gone forever if you don't have it installed on your hard drive. A gem lost to corporate spite and antagonism, you might say. Having been in the right place at the right time, we happen to have PT on our PS4, a peculiar rarity confined to a piece of hardware. In this way, PT transformed the PlayStation 4 into a unique collector's item, simply through being the container for that game. But you have to ask yourself, how reasonable is it to keep an expensive piece of hardware for nothing else than a short demo? In weighing the pros and cons of selling our PS4 to even afford a PlayStation 5, literally the only con was losing PT. So with the benefits weighing against it, we put up our PlayStation 4 for sale. But before the end, Kiki wanted to take this last opportunity to play this elusive game she hadn't yet played, and likely wouldn't ever get a chance to play again. We booted the game, played a while, then this happened. Despite really liking the game for its merits and clever design, Kiki couldn't actually play PT. Not because it wasn't available, but because it was simply too scary for her. And that sparked an idea, a discussion about what entails a game's qualities, and specifically how games can be all kinds of good without really inviting the player to want to play them. That the notion of reviewers having to play through an entire game to fully get it is a viewpoint incompatible with nuance. Because isn't there a special case to be made for those few but extraordinary games that succeed in the most strange way possible? The ones that are good not in spite of being inhospitable or downright unplayable, but because of it.
Control. With extra voices. With special thanks. Unplayable games.
When we use the term unplayable games, specifically in a positive way, we might have to clarify a few things. First of all, this is of course not coming from an elitist perspective, where we believe games shouldn't be accessible for as many people as possible. Truly, they should. And we are not talking about people with physical or mental variations that affect or limit their ability to play a game, because that frankly deserves a video entirely of its own, and it's not really what this is about. Neither are we really talking about games that are so broken that they simply don't function, or, like in PT's case, are explicitly unavailable for people to enjoy. Instead, what we are really talking about is unplayable from a more philosophical and perhaps personal standpoint. To some extent, the choice of word is simply hyperbole to make you click on this video, which you did. But more specifically, it's a striking way to describe a phenomenon that probably most of us have experienced before. You know, when a game sometimes seems to not want to be played in like an intentional way.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
They might be too hard, scary, obnoxious, complicated, obtuse, or simply... And yet, for some reason, you like them. They're actually pretty good, all things considered. You like talking about them, you like thinking about them, but you don't really like to play them. At least not in the way other games invite players with open arms. Obviously, these games aren't actually unplayable. In fact, most of our examples are going to be really popular games that a lot of people played. But they all seem to have divisive discourses surrounding them and their qualities. They all seem to be games people either love or hate, most likely as an effect of them having very specific directions or strict intended play. And no example is probably as obvious as that of difficulty. During the last decade, the From Software catalog has gained tremendous traction. Most notably, of course, are their so-called Soulsborne games. What started out as an anomaly in 2009's Demon's Souls has now become a subgenre of its own, defined by tough-as-nails combat and gruesome challenges. The Dark Souls franchise Demon's Souls with its remake, Bloodborne and Sekiro, all helped with establishing this game design philosophy as something legitimate rather than just, unbalanced trash. Harkening back to the old school of punishing but rewarding, these titles have been the catalyst for a wider discussion about difficulty options in video games. And it is certainly an issue worth talking about. The Souls games' claim to fame was their difficulty, and now it is pretty much their entire identity, which inevitably alienates a lot of potential players. These titles are made with quite clear intent of busting the player's metaphorical balls, and are not afraid to completely disregard the person holding the controller. Now, in theory, these games sound downright awful. Especially if you listen to some players spouting get good nonsense. But there is obviously some merit to these games, considering how they're not just intensively popular, but also financially successful and critically acclaimed. It seems a lot of people love these games. So what gives? At the most charitable, we could describe it as a double-edged sword. That sharp specificity towards an experience that is daunting and oppressive can be a form of thematic conveyal through game design, ultimately creating an immersive atmosphere of absolute dread and doom. Very much like a game like PT is good for being scary, Dark Souls might be considered good for being equally uninviting in other ways. There is certainly a charm and allure in its grimdark and cool world full of punishment that draws audiences and keeps them invested, even if they are not able to participate directly themselves. These games are clearly not for everyone, and how that dilemma will be developed in the future is yet to be discovered. But what we find to be for certain is that the discourse surrounding Souls games unintentionally got the ball rolling for more nuanced and involved ways to approach the issue in general. And we are, of course, not talking about the people completely unable to see why difficulty settings would be beneficial at all, but rather developers themselves. We are 100% certain that the amazing difficulty adjustments available in games like Celeste, for example, wouldn't even exist without the initial push from the punishing worlds of From Software. But difficulty is just one thing. This same realm of ideas quickly gets us into other aspects that could make a game difficult to approach, like obnoxiousness or the other obtuse. Is a game like Dwarf Fortress necessarily hard as much as just comically complex and involved? And is the point of Lisa the Painful as much the downright unfair playing conditions, or rather, how this portrays a striking message? Perhaps the poster child of the relentlessly obtuse is the 2005 cult classic, Pathologic. This game is infamous for how its thematic message is portrayed through a harsh and unforgiving gameplay loop that drives away a lot of potential players simply by being perceived as an absolute slog to wade through. It's punishing, horrible, and fucking awesome. The allure of Pathologic is how it actively employs the medium as a channel of interactive experiences, more than what we'd commonly classify as a traditional game. To some extent, it functions like you'd expect most of its contemporaries to do, but the difference is how it completely reframes those mechanics into something else entirely. Pathologic is quite commonly known to not be fun. In fact, it is designed to explicitly make you feel bad and like the entire world is against you. Most notably, it makes us question fun, which has been more or less foundational to what video games were supposed to be from the very beginning. That could just be a perceived notion after all. Do games really have to be fun to be worthwhile experiences? And that contrast from the norm could potentially tell us a lot about the very nature of games as a medium. Possibly even as art. Pathologic 2 was then made more approachable and in some ways turned out to be a lot better for it, but what made the original so appealing was how it laid the groundwork for discussions about the medium as a whole, how we talk about games in general and what really makes an interactive experience, rather than actually being a game everyone could readily pick up and play. Maybe, in that sense, it even transcends what it means for a game to be good or bad, when these value statements just can't adequately do it justice. Incidentally, on that note, we have The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, which is also a divisive game about a world, in particular a town, facing impending doom. What really defines Majora's Mask in this aspect is how it's an odd addition to an otherwise casual and largely approachable landmark game franchise that appeals to most everyone and is always a guaranteed sell. To understand the conundrum with Majora's Mask, we need only to compare it to its sibling game Ocarina of Time, from which it was molded. Ocarina of Time may be a safe blockbuster, while Majora's Mask is a high-concept elevator pitch. As such, you could probably reason that the game would have possibly been better received had it not been defined by controversy of breaking established norms. The biggest drawback is easily the time system. Link's adventure in Termina is defined through a constantly repeating 3-day loop, in which the player then has to make time to complete dungeons and find equipment to make the next cycle more optimal for further progress. It is a very interesting idea that has famously been done by other games like Pikmin, Shenmue, or Dead Rising to similar extents, although Majora's Mask is clearly the poster child of the design gimmick, having leaned into this aspect of time pressure heavily in its marketing. But that is also why it just doesn't click with some people. Ticking clocks is a common stress element, and the prospect of losing progress because of this will seem way too daunting for some to even feel good about approaching this game. However, that idea of time pressure is so integral to Majora's Mask that it would be a completely different and arguably way worse game without it. The idea of a set time schedule is what gives the game detail to flesh out Termina's inhabitants and make their shockingly human pain and fear of death all the more real. This is a game all about the end of days, how we handle regret and choose to face time catching up to us. That hopelessness can only be portrayed through these doomsday prospects being absolutely real to the player, and the existential nature of being able to save no one can only be conveyed as powerfully as having your progress be undone, leaving everyone and everything back to square one. Is it a phenomenal game? Absolutely. But a good Zelda game? Possibly not. Admittedly, this isn't helped by the game being rushed. It's poetically befitting that the game about time pressure was also finished in just a year, with Link's inability to sleep possibly mirroring endless hours of crunch. But we digress. Majora's Mask is a conceptually rich and brilliant game, but holy hell is it rough around the edges. The game is absolutely loaded with half-baked or strangely executed ideas, not in spite of the game being rushed, but absolutely because of it. Perhaps this is also what would qualify a lot of games as unplayable in the sense we're talking about. Through lost potential from being released in a somewhat unfinished state, some games might squander their true brilliance. If a game like Majora's Mask had been delayed by, say, half a year, perhaps you wouldn't even be talking about it as some non-approachable deviation. In the words of the great Miyamoto himself,
I'm not fucking delaying Majora's Mask. We need our holiday release to break even on our financial year. Sony is releasing the PlayStation 2 and you bums aren't even close to getting GameCube ready. I swear to fucking God. Sometimes I just want to flip a table on you incompetent buffoons.
Okay, perhaps the idea of half-baked nonsense is a bit too black and white, and in a lot of cases, no extra time in the world can help a unique idea be, so to say, better in a traditional sense, or at least more conventional in a time or climate that just doesn't gel with it. For example, a beloved darling of transparency is the obscure Nintendo 64 DD and GameCube gem, Dashin the Giant, which is coincidentally also the best game ever made. Released around the turn of the millennium, this absolute oddball feels more at home in the current experimental indie scene than as a Nintendo console launch window sales pitch, with proper financial backing. I mean, thanks, but how did Nintendo expect this to sell their cute purple baby playing block?
The Nintendo Shit Cube!
In short, Dashin the Giant is a free-form sandbox playground, not unlike Keita Takahashi's back catalog, where you reshape an island paradise and influence its inhabitants so you can grow bigger. What makes it stand out from most other games is how the approach to this is all up to the player and highly encouraged to be done in small chunks. The game lets you play for half an hour in which you can be a nice benefactor to the people, or Satan himself, and then you die. It's implied that you're just supposed to be content at this point and go do something else, but players have been conditioned to keep playing games for hours to strive for some kind of goal. Now, there is a goal in Dashin the Giant, but actually fulfilling it will straight up murder the world you built. And in this sense, together with Yankee controls, fickle islanders, annoying natural disasters, and this sound design, Dashin the Giant is like a ferocious tiger that refuses to be tamed. You have to play by its rules, but also understand that those rules are for you to create your own sense of fun in this interactive world. It's not for naught that the game seems to actively get more bothersome the further you progress towards that golden non-reward. to seemingly mock the way players engage with games. Is it any wonder then that Doshin the Giant received mixed reviews? Or that it wasn't even released stateside? It's practically an anti-game in a time where this was considered the peak of gaming achievements. An easy excuse for Doshin the Giant is that it's poorly designed or before its time. But honestly, no. It's intended to be rough, to convey something else with its design. During development, designer Kazutoshi Ida seemed to mostly want to make a game where it's fun to grow really tall and become a giant. And in that sense, he completely succeeded. It's just that we read games through convention and see a larger purpose than the puristic playground. Doshin the Giant is resistant, yes, but only to us with adult mindsets that require entertainment to have a purpose and higher goal. It even baits us in, bothers us, and then laughs when we reach the goal empty-handed. Fucking hell, Doshin is amazing. To say that a game isn't for everyone has sort of become a cliche in modern video game discourse, even though it basically doesn't tell you anything about the game in question. It's an unnecessary and highly unspecific statement, considering it should be self-evident enough. No game is, after all, for everyone. We would argue that game developers should strive to make games accessible to as many people as possible, but some games will inevitably be harder to experience for some because of many different factors, like those that we have explored so far in this video. Certain games are simply not playable for some people because of how they were intently designed from the ground up. It might be difficult and easily misinterpreted to say that some games are in fact better because some people can't play them. That is probably not entirely true, right? Then again, the conventions of how we evaluate good and bad could be entirely useless in this regard. Does it even matter to put forward such statements? Sometimes it is a bit too easy and one-dimensional to look at games in these terms when we talk about those that fall outside of the traditional mindset of reviews and what constitutes quality. Certainly, a piece of work can be appreciated as something worthwhile, even though some could find it to be a bit shit. Good and bad in games terminology is usually just a form of keeping up with conventions. If you examine a video game as an artistic expression though, that form of analysis might not actually be as useful in the grand scheme of things. Because really, slashing points off from a potential review score of an early 2000s game like Doshin the Giant because the villagers can't make up their mind is kind of taking away from the discussion of what it actually does. It is more about what it has to offer in terms of conceptual ideas, what it brings to the table for games as a whole, what it has to say. In fact, the themes and presentation makes the rough edges in some ways adequate, like it actively bolsters those ideas and creates a complete package. These games speak through their game design, and that message just happens to be one of discomfort for some. Majora's Mask sticks out like a sore thumb in the Zelda franchise, and judging it by this merit is of course fine. But we'd also posit that judging that game for its artistic merit is actually a completely different category. Perhaps it's fine that Majora's Mask was non-appealing for the general Zelda audience, who only really wanted Ocarina of Time 2. It can equally be a beloved favorite for people who don't even care if it is a Zelda game or not. Heck, even if they can't stand playing it. We might even be so bold to entertain the thought that the black and white perspective that games always have to be fun and non-consequential to play is a downright naive relic of a time when arcade cabinets had to fight for players' attention and coins. And yet, it persists to this very day.
The game is fun. If it's not fun, why bother?
Truly, there has to be more ways for media to be entertaining or just overall engaging without it only striving for this one simple purpose. Even to the extent where the games become more conceptual monuments than leisurely entertainment, simply through how they contrast with the common norm. To a large extent, they work so well precisely because we expect games to be another way than these examples present themselves. The games we have talked about might not always be as enjoyable to play as much as their design work is important and interesting for the discourse of games as a medium. In short, for a lot of people, they're more fun to talk about than to actually play. Their divisiveness, innovative approaches, and most importantly, how uncompromising they are in what they do to the point of inaccessibility is why the discourse around them is so strong. Truth is that in a lot of ways, these games might not have been as important nor created as much discussion and interest if it weren't for them being a little bit shit in a conventional sense. And that's good. They go beyond gameplay, they are interesting to talk about in context to the rest of the medium. And in a contemporary society where games are engaged with in more ways than ever before, where you could even have experienced a game for someone else playing it, one may even have the opportunity to see why they are important, even though they are hard to approach yourself. With a game like Pathologic, for example, chances are you haven't played it. Yet, you might actually know it better than some video games that you have played, thanks to Let's Plays and extremely long video essays on the subject. To a large extent, game experiences can be shared through other channels than just playing the game directly. And while that may not fully capture the entire experience, we can still get a clear idea of what a game is trying to convey by observing rather than the hands-on approach. Interactivity is video games' biggest asset, but it may also be its greatest barrier. This is a fundamental roadblock that affects how we talk about and expect people to engage with them. Either you play or you don't. One of which is worth more than the other in the eyes of a lot of people. But this of course devalues the experiences of the person who for one reason or another can't play all the way to the finish line. And that is kind of bullshit, considering a lot of people appreciate these kinds of games from a distance and still engage with them on other deeper levels, sometimes even more so than the people playing themselves. And if we may be a bit pretentious and prematurely blow our load on another upcoming subject, can we just say that if games are to be considered and looked at as a form of higher culture, then maybe looking at them only through play is a bit shallow and perhaps even a detriment. Sure, you can place a bunch of TV screens in a museum and let people play video games on them. In fact, it has already been done before. But is that truly enough to capture these experiences as art? Or, for that matter, the context surrounding them? Why are they special? What makes them important? Playing might not be the most important aspect in these cases at all. So if you have ever found a game unplayable, but absolutely fascinating as a piece of gaming culture, then this one is for you. A sort of reassurance that it's fine to have games that just don't work for you, despite seeming brilliant in theory, because we can still appreciate them in other ways. Perhaps with the new console generation, that may also apply doubly so for PT. Which once again found itself being topical. Because a game like PT is unplayable in more ways than one for someone like Kiki. Arguably as one of the most scary games ever made, but more famously in that it cannot be downloaded anymore. And while that vaporware aspect isn't entirely related to what we're talking about in this video, there's still a befitting poetic flair to it. As we get rid of our PlayStation 4, we permanently lose access to PT. We will most likely never play it again. And though we still want it to be preserved and available for everyone, doesn't it fit quite nicely that we solidify its unplayability for ourselves? We've already made our peace with this fact and moved on because we know that the experience itself and the knowledge it provided is worth a lot more to us personally than being able to physically play it again. Perhaps PT, more than any other game, has taught us that sometimes the very best games are simply unplayable.